Things Unexplained. Hosted by Dr. Mounts.
Let's face it, we were always ready to roll without him anyway.
CJ Derringer.
Ain't nobody perfect, right?
And Smitty Neebs.
I've never planned out hardly anything my whole life. I just free ball.
Featuring Cajun Man.
I'm just old nobody, somebody looking for somebody.
We're speaking with former police detective, author, and researcher Scott Lunsford. And you know, Scott, one interesting thing that's happened since COVID became a thing is apparently there's been a whole new onslaught of what you might call citizen sleuths. And I think that they've really...
Tim's talking about himself.
Right. No, it's true, right? Well, and they specifically mention podcasts, right? Like there are suddenly, you know, COVID hit, everybody's stuck in their house, and we've got people all of a sudden like, whoa, we've got the power of the internet here. We've got all these freedom of information laws and the ability to contact people and request things. Hey, let's look up something about this case. Let's look up something about this case. And I think that we're in a new wave of law enforcement agencies, you know, being requested for these types of information. And it actually seems like, in a way, history repeating itself. And one thing that struck me, Scott, about the murder on Lunsford from the 20s in Asheville was you talked about not only were law enforcement investigating the scene, but there were citizens coming from all over to literally walk around on and tramp across the scene and look for things.
Yes.
So it's almost like history repeating itself 100 years later in a technological new sort of way. Do you think that this is a good thing? This the new wave of citizen sleuthing?
Yes, in a way I do. As long as that sleuthing is not violating other people's rights. You're not setting up in a tree and watching somebody's house through binoculars and, basically stalking them. But it never hurts to have a second opinion or a different idea. The missing person case in Tennessee for the young boy, the young girl, a lot of people have tried to help with that, and it has actually overwhelmed the sheriff's department, from what I understand, there with their investigation. And a lot of people will call up, have you looked over here? Have you done this? We were talking the other day over coffee, and I thought that maybe a good place to look for that piece of evidence or what have you would be in old man Simmons' barn, because nobody goes in there anymore. Yeah, that might be a good point, and the detective or the investigating agency may not have thought about that or even known that the barn existed. But it's very easy to get overwhelmed, especially with right now, law enforcement agencies their manpower is dropping dramatically. The city of Asheville is having some problems with that. Buncombe County is trying to keep their officers, their deputies, and even Madison County, we're having problems, or not having problems, but we want to keep our people around. And the smaller the county is, the smaller the budget. And it may not be that you don't have enough officers. It may be that you've got a lot of stuff going on, and they're investigating a lot of different things. So all that's got to be taken into account and weighed against what information is coming in.
Oh, yeah.
Let me ask you a question. Were you ever work in a case where a person who put themselves in the investigation, it was a civilian, happened to be the one that was guilty? Because I know that happens with some of these people sometimes
Oh,
they
good
get
question.
they want to get as close as they can as the investigation.
Yes, I had a child abuse investigation, and it ended up being child abuse by proxy, Munchausen by proxy.
Yeah.
And that parent was the one that was causing the problem. And there have been homicides over cases like that. Luckily enough, our case ended well, and the parent was able to get some psychological help, and the child was safe, and everything turned out well. But we still ended up criminally charging the parent, because that was the only way we could get her to understand that she had a problem. But yes, that happens, and there's always the guy or the person that thinks they're smarter than you.
Yeah.
And they can pull the wool over
And
your.
nobody's smarter than you.
Oh, there's one of the things I always told my rookies whenever they started. There is always somebody smarter than you. There's always somebody faster than you. There's always a car that can outrun you. There's always something better around the corner. So don't take nothing for granted.
Yeah.
I'm glad
So
you
you
said
remember
that.
that, Smitty and Tim. There's always
Yeah.
somebody better than you.
Oh, for sure. Well, it's like I said, you don't have to be the fastest person to get away from the bear chaser. You just faster than the
Faster
slowest
than the other guy.
one.
Yeah.
So, yeah. But Scott, I'm glad you said that, because I was actually wondering, what was the best piece of advice that someone gave you as a rookie?
Oh, that's a very good question.
Maybe that was it.
Realistically, I started out as a patrol officer. All cops do. You start out as a patrol officer. And I think W.D. Worley, Officer W.D. Worley, who was a training officer, I got to ride with him. He showed me how to write speeding tickets. He once told me, and it's very, very good advice, and probably something that almost any profession can take under their under advisement. Never pass up an opportunity to go to the bathroom.
That's basically the same.
Never
advice
know
we give
when
you
it-
teachers. You just can't leave
You
the
never know
classroom anytime.
when your next opportunity is going to
Yeah.
come.
You can't just leave your classroom. So if there's a time you
That
can
is
go to the
brilliant
bathroom, you might as well go to the bathroom.
Exactly right. Exactly right. If you're standing in the middle of an intersection directing traffic, and you're the only one there, and you can't step away because the power's out, and they'll cause a major crash of cars in the intersection if you walk away from it, not to mention the trouble you're going to get in with your supervisor, you got to hold it, and you will think and wish that you had gone before when you. So
Yeah,
I think that probably
our motto is
Yeah,
if
about
the
any
kids are
profession.
not supervised and something happens, then we're in hot water. So you can't keep your eyeballs off of
It's
them.
exactly right.
Famous quotes. Never miss an opportunity to use the bathroom.
That's terrific. I think it could apply to so many
Yeah.
situations,
Yeah.
right?
Yep.
Nurses, doctors, teachers,
Absolutely.
cops,
Firemen.
firemen.
Yeah.
Heck
Firemen have a big problem with that. You just can't walk away from a fire.
yeah.
Those guys are crazy anyway.
Well, I guess you could try to, put it
Yeah.
out while you're there.
Well, that's
in
true. I
other
didn't think
ways.
about that.
Yeah.
Dark firemen, they've got
Might be a
an
little
out for the one problem. I hadn't even
Oh,
thought
that's
about that. Well,
might be a little too close for comfort. But
yeah.
Still.
Yeah. Or
So-
what we used to say is everybody loves a fireman. And if you see the firemen coming, you're happy to see them. If you see the police coming, you're generally either a victim or you've done something you shouldn't have done. So everybody loves a fireman. And those guys are crazy. Lots of respect for them. They going into houses that are on fire, going out in the woods when the
Mhm.
places are burning up. And Lord watch over those guys out in the west dealing with all that issues right now with the health.
Oh, but the
Yeah.
same is true for officers. Officers put themselves into very scary positions all the time as well. So.
Isn't it true that
Yeah.
domestic
Yeah,
abuse
that's true. And
calls are the most dangerous for police officers? Is that what I've always?
Generally speaking, they have in the past. Yes, that seems to be dissipating somewhat if you look at the statistics that are coming out from the FBI and from the state for assaults on law enforcement officers. We're actually getting ambushed in not necessarily domestic situations. And I think a lot of that has to do that with the training that we have had and that we get in domestic violence cases, responding and talking to people, trying to calm the situation down. And if you know it's a domestic situation, you're going in with an attitude that you can, hopefully get things calm and get things taken care of. Whereas if you stop a car, you don't know what's going to happen. But in the past, yes, I've been on the end of that. Tried to arrest a guy and for beating his wife, and he was actually doing it when I got there. And in the process of trying to handcuff him, she jumps on my back and starts beating on me.
Oh.
Leave him alone.
Oh, jeez.
Oh my God.
You never know. And it's
Right.
it's
And y'all,
Jeez.
yeah, it was all right for her to beat on him and him to beat on her. I
Yeah.
couldn't do it. So that
right.
they got apparently.
I have to say, when I first moved to North Carolina, I had a landline, which, that's the thing of the past. But in order to check my voicemail, I had to dial my phone number. And our area code here is 19. So I pick up my phone to call my voicemail, and I accidentally dialed 911. And I hung up the phone immediately, barely rang. When I realized what I had done, I hung up the phone, and they called back. And on the other line, the lady said, "Are you okay? Are you safe? Does somebody have you?" I'm like, "I'm okay. I'm sorry. I misdialed. Are you sure? Please, say that." I can't remember exactly what she was, but she was giving me instructions in case there was some sort of situation happening there. "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry to bother you. I really, truly was trying to dial my voicemail." I hung up the phone. 10 maybe minutes later, an officer showed up at my door to make sure that I was okay and not in some sort of domestic violence situation, which was amazing to me. And I felt so awful to have wasted anybody's time, but it's kind of impressive to see that
It's
response.
better safe than sorry, and you never know. And some of the unsung heroes out there in law enforcement work and in fire work are the dispatchers and the call takers that take those calls and talk to these people and get yelled and screamed at, and they stay calm. I've worked in dispatch myself. They made all the sergeants at one time when we were having a shortage of dispatchers when a lot of them retired. We all had to go in and do our time behind the phone, and that's an eye-opener. And what they go through and what they do is truly amazing, and they're kind of the unsung heroes with in law enforcement and firework. So all hail the dispatchers.
Hey, Unexplained Ones, this is Dr. Mounts. We would love for you to follow us and give us a 5-star review. Check us out at allthings-unexplained.com. There you will find links to our Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Buy Me a Coffee, and Patreon. This podcast is made possible with support from listeners like you. We are also brought to you by Coma Toast Tacos, home of Squatching.com, where you'll find my Bigfoot-themed children's books. We appreciate you. And now, back to Detective Scott Lunsford. CJ and Smitty, when I was talking to Scott on the phone for the first time, it became apparent that he was at one time essentially the Fox Mulder of the department. So, any very strange and unusual cases that came through?
Well,
that they didn't really want to deal with. They just passed it along to Detective Lunsford, and he actually mentioned a case with a psychic, right, that wanted to tell you where a body was.
And
Oh, this is
well,
fascinating.
I had a captain who got me aside one day and says, "I want you to go talk to this person. They think they have information on the case." I was not assigned to that case. The other detective, the general assignment of detectives were working it, but he asked me to go talk to this person because he didn't think, well, nobody else basically, like he said, wanted to do it because she thought she was a psychic. And the captain told me, he says, he said he did not want to be the person that went back to a family and told them that a lead was not checked out that turned out to be true, because it supposedly came from some mystic place or some ESP connection or whatever, however he described it. He said, in my cases, meaning what he was overseeing us, everything was going to be checked out and everything was going to be documented. So I went out and spoke to the psychic lady and wrote up my report and my documentation, and it became part of the case file. And that particular one didn't work out. Didn't have any real good connections to anything in not reality, but to the case. We've had dog psychics call us, and I took
Yes.
I love that.
I took a photograph
Love
of
that.
the dog that was at the crime scene and faxed it to her, and she studied the photograph, and then I did an interview with her over the phone. Apparently, she was a dog psychic.
This is amazing.
She had some renown, and she wasn't from around here. She was from out in the Midwest somewhere, and but she had.
What kind of dog was it?
It was a Labrador type looking dog, and she told me what she thought and what she thought the dog had seen. She gave me a description of what the dog told her psychically the suspects might have looked like, and how the dog ended up where he was at. And I wrote it all up.
Please tell me something came of it. Please tell me the dog psychic was right.
I can't say that she was right, and I can't say she was wrong, because in reality, that investigation
Well,
is
let me
actually
ask you
still
this:
open.
were they after a cat burglar?
Oh, goodness. Bring the dog psychic back.
Oh, okay.
Not according to the dog.
That's pretty funny. It totally reminds me, as soon as you said that about the dog psychic, there is, and we've had some Marvel Comics fans as guests in the past, but there's a Marvel Comics character, a dog named Cosmo, and Cosmo is a space-traveling telepathic dog, so I just instantly pictured Cosmo when you were talking about the psychic dog.
The dog is not a psychic. There is a woman that reads
No,
dogs.
the woman
Yeah.
reads the picture
I
of the
thought
dog.
the dog
and
was
then-
psychic.
Well,
No. I was wondering why you asked what
You
kind
were
of dog it
wondering
was.
if you were going to get
Oh.
one, weren't you? You were going to order one of those dogs offline. Yeah.
No, but I was just going to do
Well.
some tests on my own dog. He seems very perceptive.
Well, let me ask
no, I've got a one-eyed
Really?
cat that I think is psychic.
you one idea.
Yeah, he hangs out with a
He
raccoon.
probably knows some voodoo.
Yeah, he hangs out with a raccoon and a possum and a rabbit. They're all three buddies or four buddies, and I'll come home from work and they're all sitting in the driveway, or he's sitting with one of them in the driveway. It's the strangest thing. I've never seen a relationship like that before. He just hooks up with
That's
wild
neat.
animals locally.
Very
So,
cool.
Wow.
and the neat thing about him, he disappeared for over a year and a half, and then just walked up after about a year and a half, just showed back up again. He had apparently picked up by some of the people that go out and capture stray cats, and they thought he was a stray, and he wasn't a stray. He was just curious. So,
Wow.
and somehow he
Totally
reminds
made
me.
his
That's
way
really
back
neat.
home.
That's amazing. It totally reminds me of Marie Laveau. She had a one-eyed cat and a three-legged dog.
I've got a one-eyed dog too. The little
What are you doing to these animals,
nothing.
Detective Lunsford?
No. The one-eyed cat, he's just old and his eye is all glazed over. My one-eyed Boston Terrier is she had to have surgery because her eye got infected. But it's neat because she'll sit on the porch and sit with the cat, and one will sit on the one side so their good eye is facing one way, and the other will sit on the other side so the good eye is facing the other way. So that they've got they work well together.
They're keeping
Exactly.
a lookout, huh?
So we have a great question. Speaking of psychics, for Detective Lunsford, George Winters wants to know, listener George Winters. And by the way, we're talking to former police detective Scott Lunsford, podcaster, author. If a psychic lead was right about evidence, would you immediately make the psychic a suspect?
No, I would not. Other people might, but that wouldn't mean I would not eliminate the idea that person, that psychic that was giving me the information, might have got it from a different source, either as opposed to seeing something mentally or having an intuition. If you've got a grandmama's got intuition, or if you've had a mother who knew what you were doing, whether you did it or right as after you had done it, you know that psychic ideas exist. So if you've grown up with a in a family, you know that stuff is out there.
Right. And CJ, before you go on, I just want to say, before people displace the possibility of psychics being involved with investigations, I think it's only fair to, I think listeners of our podcast will remember and know that our own government has indeed conducted investigations on remote viewers and remote viewing and the possibility of it, and so I think that there's definitely some credence out there just based on our own government's experiments with remote viewers, that it's possible there are people out there that could tap into crime scenes remotely.
Well, I don't know about any of that, but I do know that in the land of fiction, one thing that our listener George and I have in common is that we love the show Psych. And so when you started talking about a psychic who was giving you information, it made me think of Psych, who, of course, he's not actually a psychic in the show. He's just very perceptive and is able to pick things up and pretends to be a psychic for the Santa Barbara Police Department. But have you ever had anybody claiming to be a psychic bring actual evidence, or has it all been sort of for naught?
Personally, I've not had any that. No, I take that back. I had a break-in where the individual was leaving odd evidence behind. And there is a lady in the Asheville area who goes by the name of Lady Passion. She's a Wiccan. And I've worked with her on some things. I was their go-between whenever they between her organization or her group and the police department when they would hold public rituals. And I went to her because of the evidence was indicating some sort of a person who was involved with with magic, or what they thought were magic. They would leave and they would break into a house and they would take knives from the kitchen and leave them in a certain formation in the driveway. And yeah, it is creepy. And I thought that was just odd. And it took 2 or 3 of those before we actually noticed that it was the same formation. And I went to Lady Passion and asked her, showed her photos and said, "What is this?" And she explained to me what it was. And she, a couple of days later, called and gave me a physical description that she said came to her in a dream. And it ended up being that physical description was of my suspect. It ended up being a juvenile, and she had described the juvenile pretty well. Not necessarily that I would have stopped that person on the street and said, just snatched him and said, "Yeah, you're the one that did it." But when I got her, when the suspect was brought in, or the defendant was brought in, there was a very good resemblance to what Dixie had told me, or Lady Passion had told me. So yeah, that has happened.
That's a tough one to explain, though. Oh, I've got to go see Lady Passion about some magic.
Well, to ask, what is one of the
I document it. You got to document it all in the case.
That's a great name. I'm going to write that one down. Lady Passion.
You've been involved with?
She's
you
a
get
very,
to talk
very nice
about
lady.
I said, what's one of the more the
say that again, please?
Cases you've been involved in? Maybe something that would be, along the lines of almost paranormal, or any of those things, besides the Lady Passion, obviously.
Well, we had a case where some individuals found a woman stretched across a grave on Beaver Dam Road with a rabbit that appeared to be sacrificed on her, and she had markings drawn on her with the rabbit's blood. And when the person found her, they were driving by, looked up and said, "There's a body laying in the cemetery." They went over there to see what was going on, and she immediately jumped up and started yelling and screaming and freaking the guy out. And he called the police. We went out there, or they went out. Patrol guys went out there, and I ended up being called because there was concerns that it was also a sexual assault, and I was the on-call sexual assault detective, and that was very freaky, and it ended up turning out to not be what it was. A situation where she was trying to get back at her boyfriend, and she staged this kidnapping, and I was able to locate where she had purchased the handcuffs she had been tied up with, I even found where she had bought the rabbit, poor thing, and the knife at the local grocery store. And I ended up charging her with cruelty to animals and filing a false police report, and the judge came down very, very hard on the young lady. And she was making the whole thing up. So there's been some strange things.
Yikes.
I had a young lady that showed up. She was brought to my attention by one of the group homes, and she told me a wonderful story about how she grew up in a satanic cult. And her family was very heavy into the satanic cults, and how she had escaped, and the different churches were hiding her and moving her about so she could stay away from the church, or the satanic organization that was chasing after her. And she gave me a beautiful, freaky story, and said she was 15, and she had been told she was going to be Satan's bride, and she had her uvula. You know, the thing that hangs in the back of the throat. And she showed it to me. She opened her mouth up, and you could see it. It was split. And she said that had been done in the ceremony of the snake by her father. And he had split her uvula in order to show she was sanctified for Satan and to be his bride, and all kinds of things like that. And it was interesting. I just happened to have an appointment later on that same day with the city doctor for follow up on a checkup, and I asked him about that. I said, "Have you ever seen? Is it possible for someone to get their uvula split?" And he started laughing, and he just went nuts laughing, and I couldn't figure out what the deal was. I said, "Doc, what's going on? What will you laugh at?" And he says, "I haven't thought about this in years." He says, "When I was 8 years old, there was a boy in my neighborhood, and he had a split uvula. It's apparently it's a genetic thing. You pass down, and some kids have it. It's very, very rare. It's not common. And this kid used to charge all the other kids in the neighborhood a nickel to look at it. And he thought that was absolutely hilarious that I had found somebody like that. And he says he said there would be no way that it could be done and not actually someone would bleed to death. And even if you didn't, it's really not. It would be very difficult to do, especially out of a hospital environment. And I checked on the girl later. She had moved on. A church had come and picked her up and moved her to another location. And I had given her my business card. And about 2 weeks later, I get a call from a detective in New Jersey where the girl had turned up. And I had been doing research on her and backtracking her. And I found out she wasn't 15 years old. She was actually 21. And she enjoyed impersonating young people. And she was actually on the run where she had been pretending to be a juvenile in another state and had been reported that she had been sexually assaulted by her 17-year-old boyfriend and that she was 15. And it ended up, once they got their investigation going and everything, they found out that she was actually 21 and they had charged her with a sexual assault on the boyfriend. And it was just very bizarre. And she ended up going to New Jersey, and the detective up there charged her with obtaining property under false pretense for lying to the church about her record and everything. And he sent me a photograph of her mugshot, and she looked every day. She actually looked like she's closer to 30 in her mugshot. But she did. She appeared very young, and she presented herself as a young person. And she not only fooled the church staff, the group home staff, but she fooled all the kids too, and that's hard to do.
The boy who charged the nickel, he's probably owns his own business now or something. That's something. He's a good entrepreneur.
Probably.
Right, quite the entrepreneur.
Yeah, that's it.
Oh man, we're gonna have to start telling some crazy stories about men, because as of right now, the ladies are seeming a little bit on the insane side.
It is what it is.
Oh, crazy about men.
We're not all like that.
And women live longer. How does this happen? I don't understand.
We just claim to be younger than
There's actually a horror movie.
Oh, that's it. That is the answer.
Where this woman's like 30-something years old and she poses like she's a teenager or something. I don't remember the name of the movie.
Yes.
but it
It was
Creepy.
that's a. I have to. Maybe that'll make a good novel. I have to work on that and put that aside, or write me out a quick outline.
So I feel like CJ has challenged you.
She just threw down the gauntlet there.
Threw
down the gauntlet.
Okay.
Maybe the male cases are just more straightforward. It's like this is what happened.
Next time on All Things Unexplained.
I had a gentleman that who claimed that he was possessed, and I sat in the hospital with him, and he would pop in and out of different voices and different types of personalities.
You've been listening to All Things Unexplained. If you liked this podcast, please do give us a 5-star rating and leave us a review. If you would like to hear more All Things Unexplained, be sure to follow us wherever you listen to your podcasts. If you'd like to learn more about our show, you can visit us at www.allthingsunexplained.com. And if you'd like to support our show, please do visit buymeacoffee.com/unexplained. A special thanks to our producer, director, sound mixer, editor, and the man that wears far too many hats. No, seriously, he has a lot of hats, Dr. Tim Mounts. Without you, we couldn't keep the lights on. Thanks for listening to All Things Unexplained.
This has been All Things Unexplained.